Hello and welcome. Glad you could make it to another tutorial, and this is the wizard's table. This table is a little bit different. Well, it's a first for me where I couldn't film everything that I wanted to film. A lot of that had to do with the scale that I was using that's in, and the small materials that I was using. It just didn't translate well into video. Plus, I also wanted the quality to be there as far as painting, and I couldn't get the GoPro in there well enough with the scale on my hands. I couldn't get to work. So what I'm gonna do is, I have filmed some, but I haven't edited yet. So what I'm gonna do is go through and look at it and use the material that I can use, and then if what I can't use, I'm gonna come back and recreate it in a larger scale, try to discuss it well enough in a larger scale, or even pointing at the object, and hopefully I can discuss it well enough to where you can use it. I think I can. I think there's quite a bit of material I can actually use as well. So I'm hoping that all works. But anyway, I'm glad you can make it, and hope you enjoy it, and hope you get something out of it. And even if it's just something, one thing that you can use in your hobby, that would be fantastic. Anyway, so let's get started. So this is the beginning of my wizard table. I cut out some strips of 3/16 by 1/16 basswood. This is 1/8 by 1/8 basswood. And for the trim I will use later, this is 1/8 by 1/16 basswood. And I'll use that. I was watching Gorilla Miniature Games the other day, and Ash on there had this new glue, and it's by Arlene's Turbo Tacky Glue, and it's supposed to be really fast gluing PVA. And I want to try that on this project to see how that is, and I want to kind of have more fine detail, or I don't want it to have the potential messiness of hot glue. So I'm going to use this to see if it'll work. Now, I'm not putting wood grain in this. I don't want wood grain because I actually want to hand paint this a little more than I usually do as far as wood's concerned. I'm going to try something new again that I haven't done before. And I could just glue a flat piece of wood to the bottom of this, but I don't want to. And if I would have lined this up originally, I could have actually centered all this stuff. But it's not going to be that critical because this is the side you won't see, but I don't want to use a flat piece of wood. I'm just going to use this spare piece to kind of spread some of the glue out on the sides. I'll put a dab here just to use it to spread the glue out, make sure it's adhered to the whole thing. It will eventually be sturdier because I plan on using this as a trim to go around the outside. So we're gonna let that dry and we'll get right back to you. All right, I'll have to admit that glue dries really quick, but better than the other stuff I've had, so I'm sold. So I appreciate that, Ash. So what I'm gonna do now is I want some kind of like some decorative pieces, and I want to have an excuse to use my new wood carving tools that I ordered. I'll have the link below in the description, these if you want them. But I want some decorative pieces to go along here, so I'm just gonna kind of notch it out. This is a little V shape. You'd probably do this with an X-Acto knife too, but I just kind of wanted an excuse to do this. The angle for me to do this is really difficult, actually. All right. I have to work out and kind of practice a little bit, but I'll get back to you on that, and then we'll cut some pieces out and we'll put some decorative trim on this. All right, I don't know what I was thinking. I want legs on this before I paint it so everything's consistent. And I'm just gonna keep in theme like I did on my tavern. I'm just gonna throw some curlicues on there. I'm not gonna put any wood grain in this because like I said, I want to paint it. So I'm just gonna use the same technique that I used previously, but on a much smaller scale. All right, we'll do the rest of them, and I'll get back to you. Also, if you want to check out the other videos, I'll put a link above for the wood carving video. I'm painting the table with khaki, and now I'm going to cover it with sepia. let that dry. Okay, as it was starting to dry, I just started playing around with it just to kind of force some grains and just kind of removing some of the sepia as it dried. And I liked the effect, so I thought I'd film it. And I'm also getting some water on my brush to help dilute a spot and then remove some sepia. Kind of give it a variation and kind of starts giving it some interesting look. All right, I put Lamy and medium in each one of these first, and then a drop of water, and then the first one is charcoal, the second one is burnt umber, the third one is raw sienna, and then khaki, and then sandstone. Never done this before, so let's see how it rolls. Kind of get the idea. See if it turns out. All right, I kind of want to explain the table a little bit. So I use those colors. I use them down here, and I only really just darkened down here and darkened up here. And then I took the khaki and I went and did a coat here, 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 and here. And then I came back with the sandstone and did the highlight. I also darkened in here with the burnt umber. I think it was burnt umber. And that's how I did the legs. I didn't want to do a lot of grain because I wanted that up here, and I didn't want to lose my carving in with all the grain work. On here, yeah, I don't know if I'm trying to make so it doesn't glare. One thing to note is I started out by doing a lot of grain on this one, and by the time I got to here, I really didn't like the grain work as heavily, so I went back and kind of covered it up a little bit, and I did more of blending, like right here with multiple colors. I came through and I highlighted with khaki, and I came back with the sandstone and kind of did some edging, and I come back with the charcoal and kind of darken up a little bit more. And same with here, I darkened this whole thing up, and then I came back a little bit of khaki and hit right there and just kind of did that. So along the edges I would hit with the darker color sometimes. I came down and made sure the individual planking was a little bit more defined, so I darkened that up. It's kind of a learning process. You'll notice that right here is kind of a dull, kind of, I hit some sandpaper right here in this area. Just the reason why is because this is where I want it to be worn, where the wizard is the most, so it kind of is a dull, washed out a little bit. Probably won't really notice unless you watch the video, but it's just something I want to try, and I like the effect. The rest of the table is shiny. Granted, probably asking yourself why I did all this work, because I wanted to learn, and I don't know what I'm covering up, so I didn't want to do it that way. And I wanted a table that for future reference as well, and that's why I did that. So on to some of the pieces that I've already done. It was just time consuming, but here's a little book. It has the scarab beetle on here, just because my call sign when I played paintball and different things was scarab, and then it went on to scarab 7664. I use that on multiple forums. How I did it is I used tracing paper. I cut it with a slide cutter and glued the paper together. I just put it all in my hand because it shifted a lot. and I glued it with this right here, the tacky glue. I just held part of it down, and I just rubbed it around in that to where it glued. I glued the end over here. And then, like I said, this is green stuff. I rolled it out with this green stuff rolled Egyptian. It has a scarab pattern on here, and used parchment paper to get it really thin. That's something that I saw on Uncle Adam's. He did some green stuff, and he found that parchment paper, because it has silicone in it, is really useful and it doesn't stick. So I got it really thin doing that. And then when I used the roller, I just got that part of the roller wet, so it really wouldn't stick to the green stuff. You know, so there's oil or your forehead sweat or whatever you want to use. And I do really know people who use forehead sweat. So this is what I'm doing. I'm just cutting booklet sheets, and I'm using parchment paper, which is really finicky to deal with. I'm sure there's other ways to do it, and this is just the method that I've chosen to do. Just make sure I switch it back and forth to get in between the pages as best I can. That's why I'm using this glue, because it's fairly rapid. I'm using parchment paper because I like the scale, but it is a pain to work with. And then I'll let that dry. Let's catch up a little bit. So the scroll I rolled up with using tracing paper, and when I rolled it up, I glued it. It was just time consuming, but it was hard to get a good camera shot, so I didn't do it. But I would roll it up, and then I would glue it with this stuff right here, and then I would do the other side, and I clipped off some just regular stick pins with a pair of wire cutters, and I put them in the end, and I glued them with some super glue gel to do that. And the books is I use cardstock for the paperback, and just cut that and flatten it down on one end and glued it to the parchment paper. This is just one of them opened up with the cardstock glued to the other side. I'm doing some scrolls, is just wrapped up tracing paper, and I will end up tying that with some thread and putting it around various areas. And then I'm making a vial holder right here. This is a 1/16 styrene rod, and I punched the holes with a hole punch, which is a 1/16 hole punch out of sheet styrene, which is 0.5 mil thick. And I glued it together, kind of bowed on me a little bit as it dried, so it's not exactly even, but with everything else going on, it won't be that big of a deal. And then with the vials, what I did is I grabbed a stick pin, and I poked it just a little bit. It's hard to see with the angle, but I poked it a little bit, took my X-Acto knife, hollowed it out somewhat. Then I took a bigger stick pin, and I kind of routed it out a little bit, just to kind of open up the end. And then I took a file on this side and filed it down to where it was a little bit rounded, and then I'm just going to glue them in. It's a lot of work for that, but it's a one-off. It's doing it one time, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And just took a little bit. I had to use my magnifying glass, so it was really hard to, really couldn't film and do it at the same time, so I'm just kind of walking you through it. If you have any questions, I can go in further, but I'm going to finish this last vial and glue those in. Oh, and I also did the little green stuff booklet and just cut it out like you would cardstock and wrapped it around, glued it to some tracing paper that had already been assembled. All right, let's go through and break some things down on here. This is an actual tooth I found up in the mountains, just hiking around. That's an actual tooth as well. So I did not make those. I just found them. I did darken this part up a little bit to get more contrast, but they're actual teeth. That's a skull from GW. That's a candle. That candle is made out of 1/16 styrene tubing. It's not tubing, this is just a rod. And I tapered down the end like I did in the tavern, and just tapered it, painted it. This pot right here, this cauldron, is a piece of jewelry. It's hollow. I glued some sheets styrene on the bottom, cut it out to circle, snipped this off the ring with a pair of wire cutters, and I sanded it down with a file to get it smooth, and just painted it gray. Now, one thing with the parchment paper, it's really hard to get aligned when you're putting it together. It wants to go all over the place. So what you can do is you can leave it like that, like it's a book that's really well used, like this one is. Like sheets are falling out of this, and it's starting to come apart because it's so well used. Or when it's all set, when it's all done, you can just trim the sides with an X-Acto knife because it's all glued together, and just trim the sides and make it look like a clean cut book, and you're good to go. This is a bunch of parchment paper right here stacked up and glued together. There's a skeleton hand in there from one of my night haunts, or an extra bit from one of my Death Army. There's also a scroll over here that's wrapped inside of it, and I just pile it on. These scrolls right here are parchment paper, and they're kind of a pain to roll up. And so what I did with that is, what I quickly learned how to roll up the parchment paper is, it was good to just, at the very beginning of it, fold it in half like that. And then at the end, I just kind of would fold it, and then fold it again, and then as I started to roll it, and granted, it was a pain to work with, but I wanted it for scale. And then as I'd roll it, it would get loose on me, and then I would just grab it and just pull it back and tighten it up and then roll it again. And then I put a dab of glue right here, and then cinch it up, let it hold it for a few minutes, and then I'd just cut it, and then I'd wrap it with this sewing thread. And then I painted that with a sandstone color and did a sepia wash over it. Went back and dry brushed it, and then the ends I went even lighter. I went to a light gray just on the very ends of them, just on the tips, so to exaggerate the rolls inside. I did the font, or I was doing it too big on this one. I don't really like it, but it is what it is. So I went smaller on these. Oh, the rings on the binder, the scarab book, is this bead wire. I just drilled a hole through three holes and just wrapped it up and then glued it on the back side because I knew no one would see it. Candles are the same method I use in the tavern. These right here, it's this tubing, and what I would do is I just kind of shape the top of it, hollow it out with my X-Acto knife. I just routed it out, and these are jewelry pieces you can buy in a jewelry, and I just glued this into that hole. Now the thing with this is it wasn't as fat, it was too fat to fit in there, so I had to taper it down, and then I would glue it in there, and then I'd spray and paint it up. Now the wick in here is, again, the jewelry wire, the beading wire. I just ran it through, and that's what the wick is. And then the candle wax is milliput. It's 2-part epoxy. I went with that instead of green stuff because it was white and I didn't have to worry about much of the change. I did a sepia wash over it, went back and dry brushed it. When I put the milliput on, so I glued let me rewind a little bit. So I glued the candles on first, and then I did the milliput. So the candles were all completely made. They weren't painted, but they were completely made. And then I was just attached the milliput and just work it down and kind of mostly on one side. And I did that as I was assembling and putting things on. I should have filmed more, so I feel bad for not doing that. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll go back, and if I have to make some subsets of how I did individual parts, let me know. So the snake is made of green stuff, and I just rolled it out with my finger and just made little long stripes, tapered at one end and had it bigger at the other. And then what I did is I just made a head and attached it to the end of the green stuff. I was going to have 3 snakes on here, but it started getting really crowded, so I decided not to. I was going to paint this into a diamondback, but I didn't. So it started getting pretty crowded. The owl was donated to me by Tyler, one of the hobby hooligans. It's off of his Tree Lord, and that is, I think, a dryad arm, and I did that. And then I just painted bird poop on the backside. Had to make sure that, the owl's not constipated, so it's actually going to poop on there. And this book right here, when I glued it, when I showed you how I did the parchment paper, when I dipped it in the glue, I actually did a second layer on the backside of the book binding to really make sure it was bound really well. And then I just kind of peeled it apart. And the pages weren't totally glued in, so I had to glue the center a little bit. And then on the backside of all this, of the books, and also these books up here, except for the top one. The top one's green stuff, but the other books, the backing is just printer paper. I just pulled some printer paper because I figured that was to scale. I glued it on the back. And one of the things I did with the printer paper to make it give it kind of the book cover is I folded it in half like this, and then I pinched it really close to the end, and then I just kind of flattened it like that to where it gave that effect. And then I could put the parchment paper inside of there, and I had a book cover, and then I would just cut it off. And so I had that bend. And if it didn't bend well enough, I just went back with my X-Acto knife and just kind of forced a little bit more pressure on it to give the effect. And then also I went back and painted it, especially on the top one, to give the illusion. Just had a dark line right next to a light line and give the illusion that it's actually darker and more looks like a book. And then I just striped the back of them. The feathers are a different story. They're a little bit trickier because they're smaller, but it's out of the same thickness of sheet styrene, and they're fragile. The vase or the vase or whatever crap they're in is out of this tube styrene again. And what I did is I would just, to give it the lip look, I just went with the round file and filed close to the top. And so it was a concave. And then I stretched out the top of it after I had thinned it out and routed it out with the X-Acto knife. I thinned out the top and just kind of bent it out a little bit more with a larger gauge stick pen. But when I cut the feathers, since I've cut them before, they're kind of tricky. And so I would cut them. Let me get the stuff out of the way. I would say this is what I drew it on. I would not get close to anything. I would just kind of slice it, and I'd work down. I'd kind of just piecemeal it off, and then I would do another line all the way. Well, so I'd piecemeal this off over here. I'd piecemeal off the top right here. So I'm whittling down to get close to the feather as possible, unless I drew the feather on a small piece anyway to start with. And then I would do this line right here entirely. I'd just come here and just do that line, holding it down the entire time. I'd come inside here. I'd do the same thing. That way I have the bulk of my feather, and then it was easy for me just to come up here, trim that off on the plastic, trim this off on the plastic, then I have the top of my feather. And if I had to do it in my doctrine, I could just do little snips here and there. And then this part down here, down where the quill's at, I would cut here, and then I'd hold it so it wouldn't break. And because when you start to cut it, because of the thickness of your X-Acto knife, it wants to separate the plastic. And this quill part's a little bit thicker than I would normally do, but because of scale, they're going to be inside the jar. It really wasn't that big of a deal. And then I did the other side. And then if you want, you can file this down and round it out if more of it's going to be showing to give that illusion. And then the other thing I do too is I go back with my X-Acto knife and I just kind of, I press down. Now this is a little bit thicker, so I'll slice. But I just go through and slice it because the thickness of my X-Acto knife separates the plastic and gives it the more effective a feather. And just go do that. And one of the things you can do is you can cut something like that, so it just adds that one more element to a feather, because you always see a lot of feathers where they have the feather separated. And I come back and do the same on the other side. Now, another reason why I do that is because especially if it's a larger feather, it takes to washes better. So your washes and it'll actually raise the plastic up a little bit, especially on the reverse side. And I will actually flip the feather over and do it again on the back side as well. So it's on both sides of the feather, especially if it's a larger feather, more noticeable. And then you just go through and paint it, pick a feather color you like, paint it, and make sure you have the quill down the center that's dark, or to where it jumps out, just so it adds that extra step to where it looks like a feather. Well, that's a wrap on the Wizard's table, and this is like take 7 or 8. It's, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with this closing comments, but hopefully there's something that you got out of this tutorial, and hopefully you made it this far in the tutorial. But it was really hard to film because of the scale, and working with like tracing paper. It wasn't proper. It was pretty slippery, and would shoot across the table, and it was kind of like stacking up a really teeny tiny card deck, and that made it difficult. But later I could trim it, so it made the book covers look fine. But I wanted that scale. I just wanted to have things more into scale, so that's why I was willing to work with those types of things. And the green stuff, making the books was a lot of fun, and finding different prints on the green stuff roller was a lot of fun, and doing that and doing the scarab. It's kind of funny because when I posted the teaser pictures of it, I didn't realize how much it looked like the Journey cover. Who knew? I do like Journey. Actually, I went to that concert, but that wasn't why I did it. I was doing it for Scarab, my call sign, but it was a lot of fun doing this. And if you have any questions, comments, leave it below. If you enjoyed the content that you're getting from this channel, please share it and let people know so the channel can grow and others can use it in their hobby as well. And just like us, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and hopefully you had a good time and it was worthwhile. And I'm probably going to jump back to the row houses now, and start working on that again. And then we'll see you in the next video. Ciao. Oh, I forgot. I guess this is what take 8 does to me. Remember what my mother used to always say, that anybody can do art. Later. Cool fire. Southern Nights.
You say so, dude?
What?
Did you say
Southern Nights.
so, dude?